Okay, before we start sketching, I wanted to show you kind of how I go ahead and set up my layers for when I do start sketching. What I'll do is I'll usually have the background layer. I'll usually throw a background color. I usually like to stay away from just a solid black-white background, just because when you start to add color, the contrast is just so horrible, and you would never in a painting have a white background anyway. So it's nice to start that background color right away, especially if you want to have some kind of dark night scene. You want to start with blues, so the painting process is actually a lot easier when you do that. So I always go ahead and start with a colored background, sorry, and then I'll create a new layer by going down to this little icon down here, and I'll go ahead and start sketching on that layer. And what's nice is having it on its own layer is not only can you delete it right away if you're if you have several layers and you have different sketches on different layers, you can just delete those and not lose all of your work. Not only that, but you can grab your move tool and move that sketch around freely. And then sometimes if I do ink my drawing, I'll have the ink layer on a separate layer, and then of course the color would go on a separate layer as well. And depending on how the illustration is created, I might want the ink on top of the color as well. So you can move these around real freely, not a big deal. But usually I'll just do a painted illustration, and I'll just put the color layer just above the sketch layer, or some artists will actually put the color layer underneath their sketch so they can actually see where they need to paint. But usually my sketches are so messy that it's just easier to paint right on top of that sketch as I go. So that's just kind of a basic intro to how I set my layers for when I go ahead and sketch and paint. And then we'll continue here sketching, and then just so you can understand how I go ahead and do my layer structure here. Okay, so we'll start out by adding a new layer here. We'll call that the sketch layer. And I try to name my layers as much as I possibly can. It's just a good habit to get into, so if you do have a lot of layers, it's just easier to keep track of things. So we'll start out with a darker value here for the ink layer, or the sketch layer. And usually I just try to keep it real simple and just use real long gesture lines. I find if I start to slow down or get too detailed, things just kind of screw up. I spend way too much time on it. So if you just keep it real loose, at least that's what I do, I find that things just kind of come together a little bit nicer. I'm not real too worried about how it looks as far as if everything's perfect. After all, that's kind of what a sketch is. It's just to get your ideas on the page. And the nice thing about digital painting is you can refine that as much as you want, really with little time at all, because the digital medium, you can undo things so quickly. So sketching is really great because you don't need to spend too much time on it. So here I'm just trying to add some detail in the face a little bit to I'm trying to give him a little character there with a big nose. And the brush that I'm using is actually that hard round brush that we set up in the previous video. I kind of like that brush because it just has a nice sketchy quality to it. I'll even use that brush to paint as well, especially when you're layering the color. It just has a nice layering effect to it. So here I'm just still keeping it fairly loose, trying to etch in some funnier details in the chin. And again, you can scroll around the or pan around the document by pushing the space bar. And to zoom in and out, I'll hit the command 0 or command minus or plus, and you can hit command 02 to back out completely on your document. But we're going to go ahead and add some hair in here, and I'll just add some real basic gesture lines to show that, and then I'll add the detail later once I figure out how high that I want the hair to go. A lot of times you'll see me skip around the document. A lot of the times I don't like to spend too much time on a certain area because I'll find myself just working on that area too much. So and then we'll define the hairline a little bit. And again, we're just keeping this all in that same sketch layer. And then I'll add some lines here for some of the shadows. Now this, again, the sketch layer isn't real important as far as keeping it nice and neat. Really, I like to keep this at the sketching stage. I'll even make it as messy as possible, just because I'll be trying other ideas. And usually with the scribble, with a lot of lines, you can even come up with new, just different designs. It's nice because you can always refine it and add your details later. So here I'm trying to open up the mouth just a little bit, so I'll erase out some of those sketchy lines in there, just so I can actually see what's going on with that mouth a little bit more. And just still skipping around a little bit. And at this stage, the face is actually coming to a little bit better. And then we'll start to add a body here in a little bit. So to keep the body real loose, we'll just again draw some real vague gesture lines here to show the thickness of the body, and some details on posture here. And I'll usually just draw some rectangles or squares for the hands to start out with and add the fingers later. And keeping the clothing real loose, we can always refine that as far as what we want him wearing later. But if you can just get a sketch a basic idea, it's good not to just find yourself getting caught up in details at this stage, because this process is supposed to be to find your ideas at this point. So if you're trying to draw in some belt buckles or stuff like that, you're just going to find yourself spending way too much time on it, especially if it's something that doesn't end up making it in the final sketch. So here I made them a little bit taller here, and then we'll just erase out the feet from before. And you can just push the E key on the keyboard to bring up the eraser, and then back to the B key for the brush. And again, this is really loose, but at this stage it's perfect because I can push my details later. And here I'm wanting to make him, maybe have him point at something. So it really doesn't look like a hand, but we can always refine that later. Just so I know that we got him pointing here a little bit, or at least showing that he's pointing. And just going back and just trying to refine some of those details after we have a basic sketch going here. And that's it for the base sketch. We'll go ahead and move forward in the next video.